Hello students, welcome back. Let us continue with the third chapter from your textbook Flamingo. The title of the chapter is Deep Water. So the last thing that we had read was that William tried to put in all his strength to jump up when he hit the bottom of the pool, but the jump made no difference. And he looked around himself for some help, for any rope, ladder or water wing, with the help of which he could rescue himself, but he could only see water all around him. And he also felt that a mass of yellow water had held him. It was as if a mass of yellow water had grabbed him, avoiding him to swim upwards in the water. Now this made him feel more terrified, and he shook and trembled with fright. It was like an electric shock that ran through his whole body. Now his arms and legs would also not move. They were also not moving. It was all freezed. And he also tried to call for help, to call his mother for help, but then nothing happened. So all the efforts of William to swim up in the water went all in vain. Now let us begin reading from page number 27, first para. And then strangely there was light. I was coming out of the awful yellow water. At least my eyes were. My nose was almost out too. Then I started down a third time. I sucked for air and got water. The yellowish light was going out. Then all effort ceased. I relaxed. Even my legs felt limp, and a blackness swept over my brain. It wiped out fear. It wiped out terror. There was no more panic. It was quiet and peaceful. Nothing to be afraid of. This is nice. To be drowsy. To go to sleep. No need to jump. Too tired to jump. It's nice to be carried gently. To float along in space. Tender arms around me. Tender arms like mothers. Now I must go to sleep. So the narrator says that something strange happened and he could see a light. He could see light while he was drowning in. And he says that his eyes came out of the water and his nose was almost out of the water. Okay. Then he started going downwards into the pool for the third time. Now he says that he tried to suck in air, he tried to breathe in air, but he gulped water instead. So the light which he could see through that awful yellowish water, that light also went out when he was drowning again into the water. And then he stopped making efforts to save himself. So he gave up and he made no efforts then to save his life, which he was making up till now. Now what he did, he relaxed himself. His legs became lifeless. Okay, he says even my legs felt limp and a blackness swept over my brain. So his legs became lifeless and his brain experienced a kind of blackout. Now when he experienced all these things, the fear that he had of drowning, it all ended up. So he did not panic at all. He became very quiet and he experienced a certain kind of peace in this drowning process. Okay. Now he was not afraid of drowning anymore and he felt very drowsy. He felt very sleepy. And he was no more trying to jump up. He didn't wanted to jump up. He felt that it was nice to be carried very smoothly, very softly in the arms of his mother. So he felt as if the tender arms of his mother had covered him, okay, had surrounded him, and therefore he felt very sleepy. Further, so by this we mean that his energy was all drained up. Okay, further, I crossed to oblivion and the curtain of life fell. So I crossed to oblivion. This means oblivion means that the state of being unaware or unconscious of what is happening. So since he was drowning, all his energy had drained away. So he was not able to feel anything. He could only feel his approaching death. So he says that he became unconscious as he drifted away towards death. Next, the next I remember, I was lying on my stomach beside the pool, vomiting. The chap that threw me in was saying, "But I was only fooling." Someone said, "The kid nearly died. Be all right now. Let's carry him to the locker room." So, the next thing which William remembered was when he gained consciousness, that he was lying on his stomach beside the pool and he was vomiting out the water. So he heard someone scolding the boy who had pushed him into the pool, obviously. The voice said that William had almost died, and the boy replied that he was just fooling with him, he was just having fun. So the voice again asked the boy to carry William to the locker room. Further, several hours later, I walked home. I was weak and trembling. I shook and cried when I lay on my bed. I couldn't eat that night. For days a haunting fear was in my heart. The slightest exertion upset me, making me wobbly in the knees and sick to my stomach. So here the narrator again tells about his experience after he was saved from drowning in that pool. So he says that even after many hours, after William had walked to his home, he felt very weak and his body was shivering. So he kept on trying as he slept on his bed. That fear was still haunting him, the fear of drowning, and he was not able to eat his food also. So the fear kept on haunting him for many days. Now this incident made him physically upset. Okay, he was upset from within his heart. Now the slightest work exertion made him feel that his knees were unable to bear his own weight. He could feel like, he always felt like vomiting because he had become so weak. Okay, sick to my stomach also, he means that he always felt like vomiting out. Wobbly here means weak. Okay, further, let's read. I never went back to the pool. I feared water. I avoided it whenever I could. So here we can again clearly understand that because of that fear of drowning, he could never dare to go to that pool again. He remained away from water. Further, a few years later, when I came to know the waters of Cascades, I wanted to get into them. And whenever I did, whether I was wading the Teton or bumping river or bathing in warm lake of the Goat Rocks, the terror that had seized me in the pool would come back. It would take possession of me completely. My legs would become paralyzed. Icy horror would grab my heart. So he says that after some years, when he came to the waters, when he came to know about the Cascades, the water of the Cascades are waterfalls. So he wanted to go in it, to the water of the Cascades. Now, whenever he went for swimming in different rivers like Teton, Bumping River, warm lake of the Goat Rocks, the fear of drowning that he had in his childhood when he was ducked in the water, that fear returned again to his mind. So he used to feel very uncomfortable because of that experience that he had in his childhood. So that fear would grab him completely and disable his limbs, and also grab his heart. So he was never able to very comfortably swim there in the rivers, in the different rivers. Further, this handicap stayed with me as the years rolled by. In canoes on main lakes, fishing for landlocked salmon, bass fishing in New Hampshire, trout fishing on the Deschutes and Metolius in Oregon, fishing for salmon on the Columbia, at Bumping Lake in the Cascades, wherever I went. The haunting fear of the water followed me. It ruined my fishing trips, deprived me of the joy of canoeing, boating, and swimming. So, this fear of water, the fear of drowning in the water that he had, the experience that he had in his childhood, that fear remained with William as he grew up. Now, he says that on the boating trips, whenever he used to go to the boating trips to different lakes in the main region in New Hampshire, Deschutes, Metolius, Columbia, Bumping Lake. So, wherever he fished different varieties of fishes, he now names the different types of fishes: salmon, bass, and trout. So, that fear always followed him to his trips. Now, he further says that his fishing trips were destroyed and he did not enjoy boating and swimming due to this fear of his childhood, the fear of drowning, the fear of water. Further, let us read. I used every way I knew to overcome this fear, but it held me firmly in its grip. Finally, one October, I decided to get an instructor and learn to swim. I went to a pool and practiced 5 days a week, an hour each day. The instructor put a belt around me. A rope attached to the belt went through a pulley that ran on an overhead cable. He held on to the end of the rope, and we went back and forth across the pool, hour after hour, day after day, week after week. On each trip across the pool, a bit of the panic seized me. Each time the instructor relaxed his hold on the rope and I went under, some of the old terror returned and my legs froze. It was 3 months before the tension began to slack. Then he taught me to put my face under water and exhale, and to raise my nose and inhale. I repeated the exercise hundreds of times. Bit by bit, I shed part of the panic that seized me when my head went under water. So, William was courageous enough to take this decision. He says that he tried to ward off the fear but was unable to get rid of it. And then finally, in the month of October, he hired an instructor to teach him swimming. Now, he would practice for an hour each day and 5 days a week. Now, William describes the learning process of his swimming classes. So, the instructor put a belt around William's waist, and the belt was attached to a thick rope, and the rope went through an overhead pulley and was held by the instructor. Now, it ensured that in case William drowned, the instructor would pull him out. So William says that he swam across the length of the pool for several weeks. Whenever the instructor loosened the rope, he went down in the water, and then when he went down into the water, that fear would again return back, that fear of drowning. And because of that fear, again, the legs would froze. Okay, it would immobilize his legs again. Now, it was after 3 months of practice when finally William got comfortable with the water. He got comfortable in learning swimming. Now, then the instructor next taught him to breathe in the water, and he taught him to put his face under the water and exhale his breath. So he was taught to raise his nose out of the water and he was taught to raise his nose out of the water and inhale. Now William practiced this exercise several times, and gradually he got rid of the panic that would grab him when he put his head under the water. So finally he was not fearful of putting his head under the water, which directly means that he was less fearful of the water itself. Okay. Next he held me at the side of the pool and had me kick with my legs. For weeks I did just that. At first my legs refused to work, but they gradually relaxed and finally I could command them. So this was another tiring exercise that he used to do, another tiring practice he used to do in order to learn swimming. So in the third phase he says that in this learning process the instructor taught William to kick the water surface with his legs. Now he repeated this exercise only for many weeks, and initially he said that his legs did not move, but gradually with practice they relaxed and finally William could order them to kick in the desired way. He had that command over his own legs. Okay. Further, thus piece by piece he built a swimmer, and when he had perfected each piece, he put them together into an integrated whole. In April he said, "Now you can swim. Dive off and swim the length of the pool. Crawl stroke." Okay. So the narrator says, thus piece by piece he built a swimmer. So finally the instructor made a swimmer out of William in phases, as he made him learn swimming in phases. And when finally William had perfected each phase, he compiled all the phases. Okay. Now in the month of April, the instructor told William that now he could swim. He asked him to dive into the pool and swim the length of the pool in a particular style called crawl stroke. Now about crawl stroke, it is a racing stroke in which the swimmer lies flat on the water with his face submerged, and he takes alternate overhand arm strokes while moving his legs up and down alternately from the knees. Okay, further, I did. The instructor was finished. So Williams swam as instructed by his instructor, and the classes finally came to an end. The instructor was finished means the classes came to an end. But I was not finished. I still wondered if I could be terror-stricken when I was alone in the pool. I tried it. I swam the length up and down. Tiny vestiges of the old terror would return. But now I could frown and say to that terror, trying to scare me, well, here's to you. Look. And off I would go for another length of the pool. So William had to overcome the fear of water. Still, he was fearful a bit, and he wondered if the terror would grab him again when he would be alone there in the water. So he tried to swim alone in the pool, and the terror returned in small phases. But now, what was the change in William? Now, as he knew how to swim, he faced the terror with confidence, and then he would tell the terror itself, trying to scare me, well, here's to you. Look, and off I would go for another length of the pool. So he faced the terror with confidence, and in order to defeat the fear, he swam another length of the pool. Okay, so this way he gained his confidence by practicing again and again, by fighting with his terror himself. Further, This went on until July, but I was still not satisfied. I was not sure that all the terror had left, so I went to Lake Wentworth in New Hampshire, dived off a dock at Triggs Island, and swam 2 miles across the lake to Stamp Act Island. I swam the crawl, breaststroke, side stroke, and backstroke. Only once did the terror return. When I was in the middle of the lake, I put my face under and saw nothing but bottomless water. The only sensation returned in miniature. I laughed and said, "Well, Mr. Terror, what do you think you can do to me?" It fled and I swam on. So here William swam like this till the month of July, but he was still not satisfied with his performance, and he wanted to be sure that all of the fear that he had of the water, the fear that he had of drowning in the water, all that fear had left him. He wanted to be sure about it. So he went to Lake Wentworth in New Hampshire, and then he dived into from Triggs Island and swam for 2 miles up to Stamp Act Island. So he tells us that he swam in different styles such as crawl, breaststroke, side stroke, and backstroke. Now the terror, he said that it only returned once when he was in the middle of the lake. When he put his head under the water, he saw the bottomless sea. He saw water all around, and the fear returned at that moment only once. But this time, William again, he laughed at the terror and said to it that it would not harm him. That fear would not be able to harm him. So he saw that the terror suddenly vanished and he resumed with his swimming. Okay. Further, yet I had residual doubts. At my first opportunity, I hurried west, went up the Teton to Conrad Meadows, up the Conrad Creek Trail to Meade Glacier, and camped in the high meadows by the side of Warm Lake. The next morning I stripped, dived into the lake, and swam across to the other shore and back, just as Doe Corporon used to do. I shouted with joy, and Gilbert Peak returned the echo. I had conquered my fear of water. So William still had residual doubts. He still had some doubt about the fear that was inside him, the fear of water, the fear of getting drowned. So he hurried towards the west. He says that he hurried towards the west direction, and he went up to the Teton, reached Conrad Meadows, walked up the Conrad Creek Trail to Meade Glacier, and there he camped at the meadow by the Warm Lake. Now the next morning he wore the swimming costume and he dived into the lake. Now he says that he swam across the lake to the end of it, and he returned just like the famous American Doe Corporon used to do. Okay, so he in a way copied the journey as American Doe Corporon did. Now William was very much overjoyed with what he had achieved. He shouted with joy as he had overcome his fear. And then he says that his voice also resounded as the mountain peak named Gilbert Peak reverberated it. His own voice of joy echoed there, and finally he was able to overcome the fear of water that he had. Further, the experience had a deep meaning for me, as only those who have known stark terror and conquered it can appreciate. In death there is peace. There is terror only in the fear of death. As Roosevelt knew when he said, "All we have to fear is fear itself." Because I had experienced both the sensation of dying and the terror that fear of it can produce. The will to live somehow grew in intensity. At last, I felt released, free to walk the trails and climb the peaks and to brush aside fear. So, this paragraph is also very much important. Now, the experience, William says that the experience had a great importance in his life, and he realized that death was peaceful and only the fear of death was fearful. Okay. Now he recollects the words of one of the presidents of America, Roosevelt, and he says that Roosevelt had said that all we have to fear is fear itself. Now, as William had experienced death and the fear of death, so his desire to live grew more intense. Okay, his desire to live grew immensely. Now he felt released from that fear, and he felt that he was free to walk up the trails and climb up to the mountains fearlessly now. So he had totally overcome his fear now. So this story teaches us how, in spite of all odds, our positive attitude and our courage to fight can help us achieve success in life. The narrator's phobia of water or water bodies had also gripped him for quite a long period of his life. However, once he decides to overcome his fear, he is able to shed it off completely. He adopts a positive attitude and determines that he will fight his fear no matter what. Okay, so we'll be discussing the question answers in our next session. Till then, reread the passages carefully, very attentively, mark the difficult words, and jot down the doubts that you have. Thank you, everyone.